So, Nintendo recently published their financial report. Lots of interesting news came from the drop, like the Switch beating out the Wii and the like. However, for me, what I was most excited to learn was how Metroid Dread performed sales-wise. Hell, I was excited to learn how Dread would perform the day it was announced. The future of the series was dependent on its success. Another failure would likely kill the franchise. See Chibi Robo, for instance. For sure, Prime 4 was already announced and would not be cancelled, but the future of 2D Metroid was in Dread's quivering hands. Perhaps, and this is purely hypothetical, but perhaps budget allocation, time, and staff allocation for Prime 4 would also depend on the success of Dread. If Metroid Dread had sold abysmally, then there's no doubt in my mind the higher-ups would see the franchise as a poisoned chalice and would try to get out while they still could. There's no denying it. Metroid as a series was and remains to an extent quite niche. Super Smash Bros. Has worked wonders for Metroid, having Samus as a flagship representative alongside titans like Link, Mario and Pikachu. Whatever one might say about the popularity of a Metroid game, most video game players would recognize Samus, if not by name, then by appearance as your one from Metroid. But an appearance in Super Smash Bros. Is not enough to carry a franchise. See Kid Icarus or Star Fox, for example. So I waited with bated breath to see if Dread would convince Nintendo not to pull the plug, and I believe I now know if they will or will not. Metroid Dread sold 2.74 million units in roughly 3 months. There is much disagreement online about the significance of this figure. Many say it isn't enough, others say it's incredible. And with all due respect, I don't really think that from an analytical perspective it matters at all from my perspective or our perspective as fans. What matters is what Nintendo thinks in this scenario. Do they think Dread sold enough to warrant sequels? To warrant long-term investment? To achieve status as a future flagship franchise? Using patterns, history, logic, and my own analysis, I think I know what Nintendo think. I think I know if Metroid Dread was a success in Nintendo's eyes, and I think I know if Metroid will become a staple, sequel-driven flagship series. And while I'm certainly optimistic on behalf of Dread as a game, I feel quite worried for the future of the Metroid series. Allow me to elaborate. Let's take that 2.74 million into context. Fire Emblem sold better, Monster Hunter Rise walloped it, as did Ring Fit Adventure. Clubhouse sold better, even 1-2 Switch beat out Metroid Dread. These statistics on their own might convince you Dread did not sell enough. I beg to differ. Context is crucial. Before we dive into the list of bestsellers for analysis, let's try to understand what Dread was trying to achieve, not in a gameplay sense, but in a meta-sales-focused sense. Dread was never going to sell 10 million, and Nintendo knew that. They were under no illusions. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has a very different purpose than Metroid Dread. Mario Kart exists to sell tens of millions. Anything less than a resounding money-printing success is a failure. Why? Because Nintendo dedicated years to building that brand, that name, that franchise. They succeeded. Mario Kart as a brand has now been built, and been built very well, and as such, Mario Kart games can't and shouldn't just sell decently okay or fine. Back on the Game Boy Advance, it was fine for a Mario Kart to be a decent success because the focus was on building a franchise. Obviously it needed to be profitable, but it didn't need to be a money printer because they were in the building phase. Money printing success was a bonus, not a requirement or expectation. But with time, expectations need to change. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe had far higher expectations than Mario Kart Super Circuit. Metroid, much like Mario Kart was, is in a building phase, if not a rebuilding phase in this specific scenario. It was never truly successful for reasons I break down in detail in my Wii documentary. Timestamps are in that video's description if you want to skip to that part. It needed to be rebooted. Metroid Dread is the foundational block, the first in a series. I know there's been loads of Metroid games before, but this is a new era. Dread is the first in the new era of Metroid. I was just barely a preteen when I got a Wii U, so folk my age likely never bought a Metroid. People slightly older never bought a 2D Metroid, as none were made for the Wii. This is not considering Virtual Console, as that is, frankly, not a mainstream platform to deliver games, especially back in that time, before putting your parents' credit card into Nintendo's ecosystem felt safe. I can't categorically prove that Virtual Console was a less effective, less accessible way to buy games, but anecdotally, the idea of eShops and Virtual Consoles confused people my age who used to just buy their games in GameStop. Plus, why would anyone want to play an old game, quote unquote? Why spend money on SNES games when I can buy a Wii U game? Old was synonymous with bad, and likely still is with the younger generation or the more casual demographic. Virtual console releases were fantastic, but they don't and didn't stand in for a new release. The point is, there were no new Metroid entries on Wii U and no new 2D entries on Wii, and the only 3D entries on Wii were A, one of the most hated games of all time, and B, the third game in a series where the first two were on Nintendo's then worst selling console of all time. Again, I go into detail on the failure of Metroid as a franchise in my Wii documentary. Dread is a reintroduction of Metroid, and the opener will never have as high an attendance as the finale. Obviously, they'd love Dread to sell 100 million units in 3 months, but no company in any kind of trade demands ridiculous numbers from the first outing in a series of products. Did Marvel expect the same attendance from Iron Man 1 as they did from Avengers Endgame? Of course not. Dread's sales needed to be encouraging, not amazing, and not abysmal. We're also forgetting that the 2D Metroid-like is a niche genre. It has a lower ceiling than a new Super Mario Bros. So now that we understand the lens Nintendo are judging Dread through, let's analyze the rest of the list to see if it meets that specific criteria. Take a look at the Switch bestsellers. I'll be looking exclusively at everything above Dread, so Dread is the cutoff point for this part of the analysis. This list is dominated by Super Mario. Yes, Luigi's Mansion is Luigi, but Luigi is just as recognizable as his brother, almost more so. The analogy is cliche, but nonetheless accurate. For a parent walking into a shop, Super Mario is always a safe bet. Recognizable, quality, colourful, ever popular. Likewise, Pokemon has a massive presence in this list, but much like Mario, Pokemon has a massive presence on every list. Stick the name Pokemon on something and it will sell. Not only is Pokemon popular among kids anyway, but it's been around for so long and been popular for so long that everyone knows what a Pokemon is. It's a my kid wants a game kind of game. The Legend of Zelda has quite a presence on this list, and one might argue that Zelda doesn't have the same pull that Mario or Pokemon do. I'd agree the pull is different, but it's just as magnetic. The Legend of Zelda is the Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter of video games. It is the most mainstream, quote-unquote non-mainstream game series of all time. If someone likes fantasy or role-playing games, they've probably played and liked A Legend of Zelda. Not only is it an excellent introduction to the fantasy world, to more, for want of a better term, hardcore video games and to role-playing games in general, but they also appeal to older, more seasoned folk because of the intertwinement of nostalgia and undeniable quality. The Legend of Zelda is incredibly recognizable, and while it may not appeal to as many kids as Pokemon or Mario, it appeals massively to teenagers, preteens, and older folk alike. It is extremely prevalent in geek culture, and it is the most popular fantasy video game of all time. It's the fantasy game, the role-playing game, the hardcore game for the mainstream. It's like Star Wars, it's Lord of the Rings, it's Harry Potter. Then you have the casual games. Not every casual game takes off, but a lot do. It's funny in a way. A casual game can flop harder than a quote-unquote normal game could, but the heights casual games can reach are far higher than any other quote-unquote regular game could. Ring Fit Adventure, Clubhouse Games, and 1-2 Switch sold better than Dread. These games are lower quality and required less investment. That much is certain. But history shows that the Nintendo published casually appealing games always do very well. See Wii Sports, Wii Fit, Wii Party, hell, even on 3DS and Wii U the pattern holds. Tomodachi Life did better than I'm sure anyone expected, as did Wii Party U, Nintendo Land and the like. Nintendo systems are seen as family systems, and Nintendo games are seen as family games. So it isn't a surprise they sell well. Animal Crossing is a perfect concoction, casual enough to appeal to that casual audience, mainstream enough to appeal to the masses, and remains an extremely recognizable franchise with years of nostalgia to give it the kickstart it needs to dominate the sales charts. It's very similar to Mario Kart, and has cemented itself as a juggernaut, if not the juggernaut, of the Nintendo pantheon. Kirby Star Allies, Fire Emblem Three Houses, and Monster Hunter Rise sold better than Dread. Rise more than doubled Dread sales for good reason. Monster Hunter World, its predecessor, was incredibly popular and broke through to the mainstream. As its sequel, Rise was almost guaranteed to be accessed, with the only spanner in the works being its Switch exclusivity compared to World's cross-platform release. I imagine the heights that Monster Hunter hits now are the kind of heights Nintendo would like Metroid to hit in the future. Kirby beat out Dread marginally, which is very interesting to me. Kirby is well established and instantly recognizable, and yet Dread, which was a reboot of a long-dead series, is snapping at its heels. I'll come back to this point in just a second because it's crucial. Likewise, Fire Emblem Three Houses barely beat out Dread. Fire Emblem, which is arguably the most mainstream JRPG except for perhaps Final Fantasy or maybe Persona. I will also refer back to it momentarily. So now that the scene has been set, let's look at the kind of company Dread sits with. Remember what the purpose of Dread was: relaunching a franchise, building for the future, taking that first step at making Metroid a flagship. There are, as there always are, the juggernauts that are Zelda, Mario, Animal Crossing, and Pokemon at the top of the list. Let's just be honest, Dread was never going to compete with them for obvious reasons stated previously. Yes, Metroid had the boost that Smash Bros. Representation brings, but that on its own is never enough. Again, see Star Fox, see Kid Icarus, see F-Zero. So if we remove them from contention, because Nintendo never expected Dread to compete with those, then we're left with the casual games and a couple others. Casual games like Clubhouse will always exist, regardless of how well any other quote-unquote regular individual game sells. Of course, the concern with a casual game's success is that Nintendo just kind of sods everything else off and says, okay, cool, we're just gonna keep making sports games because they're easier to make than a Metroid or a Kirby and they make more money. This is a possibility for sure, which is why it's important to assert that before I remove them from the list, because in truth, unless that possibility becomes reality, they are irrelevant when I'm trying to compare bestsellers to Dread. They appeal to a completely different demographic. Certainly, there's overlap, but there's a lot of people in that left side of the Venn diagram. So, for honesty's sake, it would be unfair to compare Dread sales to the guaranteed successes that are casual games and the juggernauts. Nintendo, unless, again, they're broaching the possibility of focusing on casual games, will probably not be comparing Dread sales to Clubhouse Games' sales. As such, neither will we. They do not offer an accurate barometer for judging Dread's success. With them removed, we're left with the relative non-guarantees. Monster Hunter Rise on 7 million, Kirby Star Allies on just under 3 million, and Fire Emblem Three Houses on just under 3 million. That's 3 non-juggernaut games. It's 3 non-casual games. That is very significant. Kirby is an established franchise. Kirby has had games on every single Nintendo console, and the series is getting another game on Switch in March of 2022. Kirby is established. Kirby is getting sequels. Nintendo are happy with Kirby's numbers, clearly. And Star Allies' numbers are not different to the numbers Kirby had on 3DS. Here are the numbers for Planet Robobot and Triple Deluxe. These sold worse than Star Allies, yet they sold enough for Nintendo to declare Kirby a flagship franchise that deserved an infinite number of sequels. And Dread, a series reboot, the first in a new era of Metroid, a relatively unestablished series, the foundational block, lost out to Kirby by a nose hair, despite Kirby having close to a 4-year head start. This is also despite Kirby's genre being way more mainstream. A cute, multiplayer, colourful 2D platformer with a mascot everyone recognises. Kirby's are as approachable as they get, and Dread came in nanoseconds after Kirby crossed the line. That is incredibly significant. Then we have Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem Fates did 3 million and Awakening did 2.31 million. Three Houses on Switch did 2.87 million, not quite beating Fates on 3DS. As of writing, there was nothing concrete, but there are very, very credible rumours that there will be a new Fire Emblem in 2022, likely to be revealed in the next Direct. Nintendo supports Fire Emblem, even disregarding rumours. They consider it a flagship of their brand. I mean, you don't get 8 characters in Smash Bros. If you're not valued by the company. And again, I must stress, Dread is the first game in a new mainstream era for Metroid. Fire Emblem is not. It is established. For sure, Fire Emblem could be considered niche as a JRPG, but Persona 5 is also a JRPG, as is Final Fantasy VII Remake, as is Pokemon technically, and as is Final Fantasy XIV, the game they had to stop selling because they ran out of digital copies. JRPGs are popular, and they sell very well. JRPGs don't have a low ceiling. It's dishonest to say as much. Hollow Knight, the most popular, well-known modern Metroid-like or Metroidvania, has sold 2.8 million units. That is the latest number, but that is from 2019, so it is likely higher. Granted, it was given out for free on the Epic Games Store and as part of a PlayStation Plus membership, so new figures would likely be bloated. Ori and the Will of the Wisps has sold over 2 million. A vague figure, but the only one provided. Clearly, Metroid likes are niche, and yet Dread, a kickstart, a reboot to a forgotten franchise, is going blow for blow with established, popular series like Kirby and Fire Emblem. This is the best case scenario. Exactly what Nintendo wanted. Dread was never going to sell better than the juggernauts, and whether it sold better than the casual games didn't matter because they didn't compete for the same crowd. What it did do was come close to everything else, when it really had no right to do so. For sure, Monster Hunter trounced Dread, but I feel like that's just based on Monster Hunter's strength rather than Dread's weakness. For even more context, let's look below Dread at some of the big names that Dread beat. Metroid Dread sold more than
Where's my donut?
Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, new Pokemon Snap, Mario Golf, ARMS, Mario and Rabbids, both Xenoblade games, Yoshi's Crafted World, Astral Chain and WarioWare. Donkey Kong is almost as recognizable as Mario, if not just as recognizable, and Dread beat it. New Pokemon Snap is Pokemon. Enough said. Mario Golf is Mario. Enough said. Mario plus Rabbids was for sure the launch of a new franchise, so fair enough, it didn't do remarkably. But it had Mario on the cover, and it goes on sale for around €15 very frequently. And it's getting a sequel, which means Nintendo clearly value it. But Metroid Dread beat it, despite Metroid Dread being a series relaunch without Mario on the cover. Yoshi is a recognizable character in a 2D multiplayer platformer. Dread beat Yoshi. WarioWare is a casual minigame collection with a multiplayer focus with Wario on the cover, the poster boy for internet meme culture. Dread beat WarioWare. Xenoblade and Astral Chain were both critically acclaimed and adored by the masses. It seems Astral Chain won't be getting a sequel, but Xenoblade is rumored to be getting another sequel, and Dread beat them both. Sales-wise, Metroid Dread did not break into the Juggernaut category. While I'm sure Nintendo would have liked it to, it didn't. And they didn't expect it to, but it came closer to breaking into that inner circle than almost any other franchise. Dread nearly beat out far more recognizable franchises in less niche genres, games with sequels in abundance, despite it being, once again, the first in years. And to top it all off, Dread beat out a plethora of games it arguably shouldn't have. And all of this in 3 months. All the while, at full price. Dread will have plenty more holiday seasons and Black Friday discounts to climb the list. This was a very successful relaunch of the Metroid genre. However, as much as I wish I could end it there, all is not rosy. I really do apologize for my cynicism. I really wish I could just end the video here, but I think these numbers are bloated. The facts are, Metroid has never sold well. 2D entries especially so. The patterns show that there is always a decline in sales. Dread should not have sold this well, but it did. And by looking at patterns, I'm not optimistic about how its sequels will perform. Yes, Metroid Dread is very high quality. It was nominated for Game of the Year after all. It was my Game of the Year, but I believe Dread has sold so well because of hype and the hashtag Buy Metroid Dread movement. Not only that, but people want to be part of a niche fandom. This is something I elaborate on in the first segment of my essay on PlayStation and Microsoft wanting you to fight, and it rings true. People want to be part of a club of fans. And Metroid is the cool, hardcore, underrated niche franchise in the Nintendo fandom. People buy into Metroid because since the Switch has been successful, buying into the Nintendo fandom is very, very desirable. Now, I'm not trying to preach that this is wrong. It's natural. When I see other members in the community saying X game is underrated, I'm obviously going to take their advice. I'm part of that community and I like trying out different series. It's cool to feel part of a niche demographic. But am I going to try the sequel to whatever game I'm suggested after I check out the new hyped series? Am I going to come back for more? There's a chance I've had my fill. Don't understand the hype, don't like the game, or don't feel that same magnetic pull to be part of that specific community once the sequel's out, because I'm already part of the community. What happens when it's not cool, niche, or hyped up? Sequels almost always sell worse. Nintendo internet presence and Metroid's presence in the fandom very, very likely compounded Dread's success, which leads me to wonder about a more important statistic. How many of these first-time Metroid fans will come back for more? And how many long-time Metroid fans will feel compelled to return when it doesn't feel as monumental as the return of Metroid felt? Part of me worries that Metroid Dread 2, which it won't be called that, but you know what I mean, will sell a lot worse. Doesn't even matter if it sells marginally worse or the same. Like I said, Dread is a foundational platform. Platforms exist to be built on. Metroid Dread is a game that's supposed to be the first step at building up a flagship franchise. I have no doubt Nintendo wants Metroid to be a juggernaut. Dread is the first step in that progression, but if they trip over their laces on the next, things are gonna look very dicey. perhaps more so than if Dread had just outright flopped. I'd love Metroid to become a staple, a flagship series. Dread hopefully suggests that it might, but its sales to my mind are somewhat deceiving. Yes, it is exceptional for the relaunch of an IP for a foundational platform to be built off of, but that foundation needs to be built on. And the foundation looks almost too good to be true. Without as much hype, without as much traction, without as many hashtags, without as many new fans who don't know if they'll like Metroid or not, will its sequel succeed? Patterns say it won't, and that's a sad note to end on. I'm purely crystal balling, but it isn't impossible. In fact, I'd argue it's decently likely. Dread has sold well, and I think there will be a sequel, but I don't think that sequel will do well. Will Metroid become a franchise, a staple for Nintendo? Probably not. Splatoon 1 on Wii U sold 5 million units. That was a new IP on a failing console. To be fair, the genre was mainstream, the presentation was accessible, and it had multiplayer. It was a winning formula, and the sales reflect that. Splatoon was not niche, it was a major success. Metroid Dread, if judged through the lens of a new IP, which technically it isn't, but it is a relaunch, does a lot worse than Splatoon. It sold 2 million copies less on a way more successful system. Splatoon is a guaranteed staple, a new flagship. Can Dread ever really be, while its genre remains so incredibly niche? Metroid-likes or Metroidvanias aren't popular as a genre. A more serious sci-fi tone isn't as mainstream. There's no multiplayer or family-focused element. It has a ceiling. It cannot break through into the mainstream the same way a Mario, a Pokemon, a Splatoon, an Animal Crossing, or a Zelda does. Hell, I'd argue it can't break through into the masses the same way a Kirby can. It has a ceiling. I love Metroid, but it doesn't have a winning formula for popularity. They are quality, but quality is not always reflected in sales figures. And in the end of the day, money makes the world go round. The individual sales for Dread are encouraging, but so are the sales for Metroid Prime 1. Each Prime sold worse than one, culminating in the remarkable failure of Other M. Then, of course, as you know, the series went on hiatus. Pre-Prime, Metroid NES sold 2.73 million copies, with every subsequent entry selling worse than the one before, except Fusion, which sold 1.6 million, 200,000 more than Super, but still 120,000 less than Metroid 2, and 1.13 million less than Metroid NES. Then, the series went on hiatus again until Prime, where, as previously mentioned, the cycle began anew. And even then, Fusion and Metroid 2 were handheld games. They're not exactly appealing to the same audience, and it's dicey to compare sales between home console entries and handheld entries. Metroid games, unfortunately, have a habit of selling worse than their predecessors. Why wouldn't that pattern continue? Metroid was failing, skipped the N64, and was relaunched in style in 3D on the GameCube. Then it began to fail again. Metroid skipped the Wii U and was relaunched in style on the Switch. Will it fail again? There are definite parallels here. Pattern analysis, logic, and history unfortunately dictate that Metroid is probably never going to become a flagship series, even on the level of a Kirby. I really hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. Of course, let me know what you think in the comments. I'm always open to other perspectives. Thanks, as always. Very quickly, as an outro, I'm just interjecting here to say that, obviously because of all of the news in January, the video schedule and script writing, the voiceover, it was all pushed back, all a bit messed up. There were 2 analyses that I was working on simultaneously. They've been pushed back. In those analyses, I make 2 predictions. I think they'll be invalidated pretty soon. In fact, I think they'll be invalidated before I can even get the videos out. And I'm about 95% sure I'm right here. So I just want to say it so that it doesn't sound like I'm bullshitting when I eventually do put out those videos. So completely unrelated to Metroid, Spider-Man PS4 is coming to PC as the next port, and Dwayne Johnson is going to play Kratos in the new God of War. Yeah, so thanks as always for watching, and I will see you next time.